More than 2 decades after 28 Days Later revolutionized modern horror, writer Alex Garland and director Danny Boyle have returned to the world of the infected with 28 Years Later, a film that I think is fantastic, but that I think is going to be a very divisive experience for audiences. How does this new film carry on the world of the infected, and how does it reflect our current reality? The answer is in a movie that takes some wild swings, but is more emotional than it is terrifying, although there are plenty of scares to be had too. And with the promise that this is the beginning of a new trilogy, how does 28 Years Later stand on its own? Come with me as we return to infected Britain and discover the many horrors and beauties of 28 Years Later. 28 Years Later is written by Alex Garland and Danny Boyle, the team behind the original 28 Days Later, and that famously basically skipped out on 28 Weeks Later. And the film stars Alfie Williams as Spike, the 12-year-old son of Isla, played by Jodie Comer, and Jamie, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, a family living on the small community of Holy Island, which lies just off the coast of England. And 28 years later, after the rage virus infection began in Britain, the country has basically been quarantined from the rest of the world, driving it back into the Middle Ages, where only a small group of people survive alongside the rage infected. And while Holy Island is able to survive as a community because it's only barely connected to the rest of England, it's a ritual for its people to go back to the mainland to hunt and gather, and also prove themselves against hordes of the infected. But how have the infected changed in almost 3 decades since the infection began? And what secrets are hiding for us in this strange new world? That's the main setup of 28 Years Later, and this is a film that goes to a lot of wild places. Not because it's making some huge revelations necessarily, but because this film is so different than what you might expect. Now, if you were eagerly anticipating 28 Years Later, it's probably because of the amazing trailers that have been coming out within the last half year. I myself got really hyped up for this film because of the original trailer, which used an old recording of Rudyard Kipling's poem Boots. And that recording actually does play a part in this film, but listening to a recent interview with Boyle and Garland, what I found interesting was that that wasn't originally part of this movie, but was actually a decision made for the trailer by the marketing department. And when it went over so well, the team actually decided to put it back into this movie, which I think works really well, even if it is used in a slightly different way than you might expect. And one of the big points of contention that I think is going to happen about 28 Years Later is that those trailers that are amazing set a certain precedent for what I think people are going to be expecting from this movie. Now, a lot of this film is really intense, it is scary, but that is the main idea behind a lot of those trailers. And what you're going to expect is that this is a film that carries its tension all the way through. But what I find the structure of 28 Years Later to actually be is 3 very distinct segments that first expand the world and then contract it smaller and smaller and smaller as its story becomes very intimate. Now, I don't want to get into too many spoilers yet. I will have a spoiler section a little bit later in this video that I will very clearly mark, but those trailers really hide a lot of this movie. If you go back and watch them, there is essentially no dialogue included in any of that. And what those trailers are really trying to show you is a mystery of how infected England has evolved in 28 years, what this story might be, the tone that might be set for a lot of the things to come. And I would say the overall prevailing tone of the trailers is chaos, war, and this mystery about what's actually happening in Britain now. And a lot of that is in this movie, but it becomes a lot quieter and more intimate and less about mystery and less about world building than you might expect from those trailers. Now, again, no real spoilers yet, but the first act of this film, the first third, as you would probably know by those trailers or by my intro right now, is that young Spike and his father, Jamie, go and leave Holy Island, and they go onto mainland Britain to hunt, and it's sort of this ritual to sort of prove Spike's manhood, right? This is sort of the ritual that changes him from a boy into a man, supposedly. And that is what the first act is really concerned about. Now, I think a more traditional film would take that premise and have it be like the entire film, and have, this whole journey take up everything that happens in the movie. Instead, that is the first act of this film. And once that story comes to a close, the story of the film as a whole shifts a lot and has a different focus. Now, what you might think is happening from the trailer are issues of cults in this island, or say the mystery of the infection, or trying to solve the infection, right? Or a giant battle that happens. And that's not really the case at all. This is Spike's story. This is a coming-of-age story. And the infected and infected Britain, they're the background, or they are the challenges, they're the obstacles that he has to overcome. And to some degree, the world of this infection is just accepted as is. There are people with different outlooks on that. I'll get into that more in spoilers, but for the most part, what we're living in is a young boy's journey and how he accepts this world or rejects this world, and what he chooses to do as a growing boy who's coming into manhood, and how he chooses to accept or reject the premises of his community and what's to be done there as well. And I think that is very compelling. But this is a movie that makes hard shifts consistently throughout. And if you don't choose to go along with it and choose to sort of let the movie guide you to where it wants you to go, I could very easily see this film throwing you off and you sort of not enjoying, say, even half or 2/3 of this film as it changes very suddenly. Actually, I think that the most of the approach to this movie is hard shifts in tone, in media, in character focus, in meaning, in theme, in kind of everything that it's doing. Boyle is a huge fan of mixed media in his films, and if you've seen my video on 28 Days and Weeks Later, when Boyle shot 28 Days Later, he used these mostly handheld prosumer cameras that gave it a very artifacted and old look to it, a very brittle digital appearance. And I know that appearance can throw a lot of people off, but it was an experiment by him, and I think it works really well in that film. And over the years, he just continues to experiment, to try new approaches with his films. Some of them work better than others, but he is not a filmmaker that just has a set style. He is very happy to adapt to the different writers that he works with. He seems to be a really collaborative creator, and I think he's really an exciting creator, even if it's sometimes hard to fully nail down what he's going for. Not all of his films work all the time. He has major and minor works, but he is a fantastic and really exciting director, and he still is all these years later. He hasn't made a film for a while. He was originally supposed to make the last James Bond movie, but he got into fights with Eon and he dropped out of that project, and eventually that became No Time to Die, which is, I think, completely different from the movie that he was planning on making. And I would have loved to have seen a Danny Boyle directed James Bond movie. It would have been a really unique film for good and bad, I'm sure. So it's been a while since his last movie, and coming back, he just feels so fresh. He feels bold. He feels like this is just a big swing, and he and Garland are not afraid of making it feel mainstream or making it predictable. I was listening to an interview. So one of the main interviews that I listened to after watching the movie, because I didn't want to spoil anything, was on the Evolution of Horror podcast, which is a fantastic podcast. I'll link it in the description below so you can go check it out. But what I didn't realize before I heard that podcast was that they actually got the rights back to the 28 Days franchise in the last few years, and that was really what spurred them on to try and make another movie. They kind of talked about making another film for a long time after Weeks, and for a long time it was supposed to be probably 28 months later. And who knows what that would have actually looked like if they had done it years ago. But getting the rights back spurred them on to be really bold and to pursue this new story. And I think that this is a really fearless film, and that's really exciting to me. And I do think it works really well, and it's sort of not concerned about living up to your expectations to most of the film. I would say that the first act gives you kind of everything that you're expecting, and then it spins off into really its own thing. So I really love that approach. I think it's exciting. I think it's exactly what this film needs to be. It is not a movie that's trying to just be 28 Days Later again. And I think the trilogy is really going to be its own thing too. It is a movie that's not about answers to mysteries or about, remember this thing or remember this person. It's really trying to be its own unique story. And by the end, we begin to tie in just a little bit more into what we remember from earlier films. But until then, it's not concerned about that at all. But back to my earlier point about mixed media, what's really interesting about the filming of 28 Years Later, which is done with cinematographer Anthony Dodd Mantle, who also shot 28 Days, is that the vast majority of the film is shot using iPhone cameras, heavily modified and using different lenses, and also some other lightweight digital cameras, which you can sort of see the switch happening sometimes from shot to shot or scene to scene. That gives a really interesting look to a lot of the film. It feels intimate, it feels broken, and it has this interesting shallow depth of field to a lot of the frames, where when things begin to sort of blur in the background, they become digitized, and there's an interesting sort of artifacting that happens. It becomes almost blurred in like a kaleidoscopic way to some degree. And it gives this film a sense of reality and a sense of immediacy that I think is really special and strange. And I think that the overall tone of this film, especially when it comes to anything to do with the infected and the encounters with them, is panic. It's a panic-inducing film. And especially in the first act, when there's a lot of encounters with infected, chases and fights and hiding, I found myself in the theater kind of just going like, oh shit, oh fuck, oh shit. And it's really intense. The other half of the film, the overall emotion is sorrow. But with this intensity and this panic, the use of the iPhone camera brings this immediacy. It doesn't feel staged. It doesn't feel like they're using, makeup and effects. It just feels so gritty and close. Another technique that they used, and I'll put a picture here for anyone to see, is that they would mount many, many iPhones on this rig all together in a sort of a semicircle for certain shots. And when I saw that before, I was like, well, why do you need to shoot that many slightly different angles at once? And what's actually happening is they're sort of making their own mini version of bullet time. With Keanu dodging the bullets in the original Matrix, when it goes in slow motion and the camera goes around him. What they did was they filmed that on a green screen with dozens or hundreds of cameras mounted in a row and sort of circling around him in a wave pattern. And when he did his stunt, they all shot off consecutively going around, and that's what captured that in slow motion. So they're doing that with these certain shots, and a lot of times it's the moment of like impact of an arrow going through an infected's head or heart, and as soon as that happens, snap, the camera shot goes zoom and it flips all the way around, and it gives this really strange and abrasive sort of look to moments of violence, capturing it from many different angles. And I thought it was really, really unique and really caught me off guard at times. And there's moments like that, or there's these moments of night vision of the infected attacking people or animals, and instead of being green, it's red. And you cut to these shots and it shows you the infected up close in these moments of our characters listening for them and imagining them or hearing them, or flashes. It gets you into the headspace of our characters in a way that I think is incredibly effective and scary and intense, and like I said, panic-inducing. And that's really what happens a lot in those early moments. It is very, like I said, abrasive in a way, and is going to throw you off and is going to make you feel discombobulated a lot. And Boyle will switch back and forth between very classically shot moments and those handheld, up-close, frenetically edited scenes. There's moments that are incredibly beautiful, and I won't spoil it, but in the first act and in the third act, there are things that are shot in a way that feel cosmic, that feel like the bounds of reality and spirituality are beginning to expand in the minds of our characters as our characters sort of become one with the universe in some ways. It's gorgeous and it's beautiful, and it really caught me off guard at times because, like I said, it's a very intimately focused film throughout it, and then you get those moments of like the expansion of your consciousness. So I love that it was able to do that. And before we get into spoilers, my overall thoughts on 28 Years Later is I gave this on Letterboxd 4 out of 5, which I think is fantastic. I would say that I still prefer 28 Days Later. Still not really a fan of Weeks, but this is such a great movie. It is wholly original and unique. It has great performances. Alfie Williams as Spike is actually really good, and that's super important because he's really the focus here, as he stays in focus while different characters come in and out. Aaron Taylor Johnson's really good as his father. Jodie Comer is giving a very complex performance as his mother, and then Ralph Fiennes comes in the third act as a mysterious character that becomes very important, that seems like one thing at first, and who he truly is revealed pretty quickly and in a very interesting way. He comes in and gives a very different lens on this story, the meaning of it, and this world, and how our characters choose to accept it or accept their own lives. And I loved it. I found the third act of this movie to be very emotional. I have no problem saying that I was basically sobbing in the theater at certain moments of this movie, and I will try not to cry on camera because I'm a very ugly crier. It's very messy. I look kind of like Russell Crowe in the first act of Gladiator, when snot is getting everywhere, and it's just it's a real mess. So I'm not going to try and do that, but I might do it in the spoiler section. We'll see. Incentive for you to keep watching. It is an emotional film. It's emotional in ways that I didn't expect, but it creeps up on you. And when these moments of real emotion happen towards the end, it's a very emotional climax to this movie. I felt overwhelmed. I thought that it was sad and beautiful. It had so much grief in it that felt real. And a lot of this movie is about death, living our life in acceptance of death. What we choose to do with the acceptance of that reality. What does that mean for our lives? And I loved it. It is a very, very different film than what you might expect. If you see it and it throws you off at first, and you're not sure if you liked it or not, watch it again, get on its wavelength, and then kind of decide a little bit more, because I found it to be exciting, emotional, thrilling, special, beautiful, and I loved it for what it was. And I'm very excited to see what parts 2 and hopefully 3 are after this. So let's get into spoilers. Spoiler warning, here we go. So the spoilers of this film aren't really some big revelation. There's not some huge reveal about how it's aliens or that it's all a big lie or anything like that. The world itself is set. The infected are who the infected are, but they've begun to sort of evolve in ways to become these tribes of infected led by an alpha. And I suppose, one of the distinguishing features of an alpha is a really massive dong. There are a lot of infected penises running all around. Every infected is naked mostly because it's been decades. They're not really too concerned about dressing themselves. And you sort of begin to understand them a little bit more. And especially as you encounter Ralph Fiennes' doctor, who has been living on Main Britain for decades and is able to survive. And he sees the infected, as their own people dealing with a disease. And what's interesting is, it's never said, but he clearly still follows his Hippocratic oath to do no harm. He doesn't kill the infected. And he lives a life in mourning of death. And he has this giant bone temple to some degree with these giant towers made out of, femurs, and he has this sort of tower of skulls. And if you see it in the marketing, you think, oh, it's some crazy cult and he wants to kill everyone, except that what he does is he takes bodies of the infected and the uninfected that have died, and he, boils them down and takes their bones and makes this monument, this memento mori. And that is the big sort of set piece of the finale of the film. It's like, well, why is that the finale? Is it, watching the trailer, you think it's some cult that they're encountering, or that it's this big battle of, over the island. And it's not that at all. At the end of the first act, Spike and Jamie get back to Holy Island, and they're able to move on, and Jamie is celebrating his son. We find out he's also cheating on his wife, and you've sort of spent the first act wondering sort of what's happening with Jodie Comer's character. She's clearly sick and not well, and what you find out is that they don't really know why she's sick. Is she dying? Is she not? And the rest of the film becomes Spike's journey to save his mom. He takes her back to Britain. He sneaks off with her because he finds out about Ralph Fiennes' doctor, who is a general practitioner, and maybe he can save his mom, right? And so the middle act of the film becomes this search for him. They encounter a soldier from the military that patrols because Britain is quarantined as the rest of the world moves on. And that, you begin to sort of see glimpses of the outside world, and they really reflect what is happening outside, how it makes this world of infected Britain seem even more backward. There's these moments early on of footage of knights and archers, and that this holy island is sort of living in a medieval past to some degree, and has mythologized their own existence as these sort of like holy warriors. You see glimpses of pictures of the Queen. You see these banners. The island itself has very traditional gender roles, splitting men and women, and then this understanding of what's really happening through the soldier or through Ralph Fiennes' character, his name is Dr. Kelson, and he is sort of trying to understand as much as he can about who the infected are and why they are the way they are, what drives them to live. And it really changes your understanding of this world, and it makes it a lot more complex. The focus of the rest of the film is Spike trying to save his mother, Isla. And eventually what you find out is that Isla has terminal cancer that has metastasized to her brain, and that she doesn't have long to live. And again, spoilers here, the emotional finale of the film is that Isla chooses to die and is trying to help Spike accept her death. And with Dr. Kelson's help, she passes in a gentle way, with a moment of love between her and her son. There's also earlier, in another moment that I thought was really effective, they encounter a pregnant infected, and Isla helps her give birth to a baby. And because of the placental wall and the way that keeps out infections from passing from mother to child, this baby is not infected. They take the baby. It's this really interesting, beautiful moment of connection between two mothers. And it really, I think, recontextualizes a lot of this, and this idea of the othering of another group of people, the real connections that we can have as humans, and that the regression seen in Holy Island needs to be moved past. And so the emotional climax, like I said, it was making me sob in the theater. It was really effective. I didn't expect this movie to dive into issues of maternal mortality, and living in the realization of our own eventual death. It was emotional. I just think it hit on a lot of things that I have been struggling with recently. You know, when I think about sort of things that I've been thinking about a lot that have been on my mind, you know, issues of the fragility of society, the future that we leave our children, the effects of pregnancy and childbirth on the bodies of mothers, you know, the changing dynamics between child and parents, issues of terminal cancer. These are all things that I have actually been thinking a lot about. And they were all in this film, especially in the third act. And it was very emotionally overwhelming for me. And still I feel very emotional from a lot of these things that were very beautifully touched on in this film. And it didn't feel exploitative and it didn't feel fake. It felt very real. And I love the movie for doing that. And you wouldn't think that a film about, you know, crazy infected people running all around naked on Britain would be focused on that, but it was, and it made this film so much more special and different. Obviously, a lot of this movie is about Britain itself. And I know that Garland had ideas of Brexit in mind when he wrote it, and I'm sure Boyle did too. And it's probably what drew them to this film and why they wanted to make it this way. And this idea of Britain being cut off from the rest of the world, regressing. How do you choose to live in a future where the rest of the world is moving on without you, but your own home chooses to live in the past? And what does that mean? And how can you move forward, or how can you grow up in that? And the film has so many hard gear shifts, and it's really funny at times, it's really scary at times, it's really sad at times, and the cuts between them are like instant. And I found that to be almost like hyperactive in a way that I was enthralled by and thrilled by, but at the same time, like, man, you got to be ready for that. You really got to be ready for this film to take you on a huge journey that goes anywhere and everywhere. And its shifts in perspective and tone happen on a dime. There's no establishing of the tone changing. It just does. And the film ends in a very strange place where this is a very complete story. And I love that it is. And then it sets up a sequel. At the beginning of this movie, you have this flashback to the start of the infection years ago, and this outbreak, and the one boy that survives this horrifying massacre in his own home with the Teletubbies playing. And he ends up running to the church where his father is a pastor, and his pastor accepts all the infected running at him and is turned and devoured, and it's really crazy. And the son survives. He has this gold cross, and he's saying, you know, he's pleading to God, like, why have you forsaken me? And that is how the movie starts. And then we cut ahead 28 years. And you're like, well, so what is that? Who is this character? How's it going to play into it? And I kept wondering, like, who's this going to be? Well, the very end of the film brings that character back as Jack O'Connell, who you might know from Sinners as the vampire villain of that film, who was awesome. And he is returning here as a character named Jimmy. And Jimmy and his fellow cohort of blonde-wigged, karate-fighting, track-suited, crazy people save Spike as he returns to the island on his own, having dropped the baby off, who he names Isla, back in the safe community. The fate of that baby was making me really worried for a while, but the baby's okay. And he goes back to the island to live and try and grow and hunt. He finally gets headshots on the infected that he was trying to do this whole time. And all the while, I believe it's East Downings is the name of the track, is playing from 28 Days Later, which is the track that happens when Jim is first awake and wandering the deserted London. And that's playing in the finale. Then you get this Jimmy cult that's there. And there's two things that are very strange about the Jimmy cult. One is that they're basically Power Rangers with, multicolored suits, which is perfect for Spike because very early on we see that he is a fan of Power Rangers or Super Sentai. You know, he has this old figure from the 90s or early 2000s that kind of, I think, makes him sort of vulnerable to the presentation of these people by coincidence. It's set up just in a moment early on. And the other thing is that the Jimmies have all styled themselves after Jimmy Savile, who was a children's entertainer in Britain for years, and in recent years was revealed that he was a longtime pedophile and was a horrible, horrible, horrible person that if there is a hell, he will be burning in. And in the context of this movie, it's like, so if the infection happened in the early 2000s, then the allegations against Jimmy Savile were never revealed, and people that, you know, idolized him never would have had anything change. And now you have this Jimmy character played by O'Connell styling himself after this person as this cult leader who brings Spike into his cult, and that's the end of the movie. And you're like, well, what the fuck's going to happen now? It's a fascinating way to end. It becomes so weird and funny and stylish. I believe like a thrash metal cover of the Teletubbies theme is happening when all of these track-suited kung fu fighters are decapitating infected. It's really weird. It ends on a very strange note, and I really enjoyed the movie's boldness there. And what a strange way to end, as I'm scared, and then I'm crying my eyes out, and then I'm laughing going, what the fuck is happening? I love how bold this movie is. It's a big, bold, beautiful swing of a movie, and I love it for that. I'm interested to see where the next one goes. In January, I believe, it is 28 years later, The Bone Temple, which is directed by Nia DaCosta, but is still written by Garland and produced by Garland and Boyle. And the plan is for another film to make this a trilogy. And they've said that Cillian Murphy's Jim is coming back at some point. I was expecting him to make a cameo here, but he is not in it at all. And we'll see what happens, because I have no idea what they're going to say happened to that character in the years since, because it seemed like he was going to be rescued. Also, you don't really have to watch weeks for this film. It doesn't really matter. The rest of Europe is fine. So overall, you know, I'm a big fan of 28 Years Later. I think it is a wild, utterly unique experience, and I am excited for more. I highly recommend it. Go in with an open mind. Don't expect a 28 Days Later again, but with a bigger budget and a different setting. Expect something completely original, and I think you can really go along with it, because I think this movie is great, and I'm excited for more. So thanks for watching. This was a very impromptu review once again. I already have next week's video done, which is a Jaws retrospective for the 50th anniversary, talking about all the Jaws movies. And look forward to that. Look forward to a lot more crazy stuff coming in the near future. We're ending Summerween next week, so thanks for following along with that. It's been a lot of fun. And I'll talk to you again soon. Thank you to all my patrons and members for their support. And yeah, go see 28 Years Later. It is a wild, fun, scary, emotional blast.